Well, the Uganda's People Defense Forces, the UPDF, has now deployed more troops and more military equipment to its northern border with South Sudan after that upscale of violence between the UPDF and the South Sudanese People Defense Forces. Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you about that particular deployment by the UPDF, as well as I'm going to tell you about the toll of this conflict on both sides, just how many of the UPDF soldiers lost their lives and how many of the South Sudanese Defense Forces troops lost their lives. In this video as well, I'm going to tell you about the civilian toll of this conflict and what is the story from both sides. What is the UPDF saying of how all this started, and what is the South Sudanese Defense Forces saying of how all this started at Kajukeji County? Well, this is Bonafide. If you haven't subscribed, kindly subscribe and hit that notification button so that when I release something new on the Ugandan South Sudan crisis, you get notified as soon as possible. Well, at least 6 of the South Sudanese Defense Forces troops have lost their lives because of the conflict that they had with the Uganda's People Defense Forces at their border, their southern border with Uganda at Kajukeji County. And while it is well known that the forces from Uganda were from the Uganda's People Defense Forces, that is the national military of the Ugandan government, the forces of the South Sudan were from different authorities. The 6 of those who lost their lives from South Sudan were from the prison, wildlife, and the South Sudanese People Defense Forces. Therefore, there were different authorities along the border that engaged the UPDF, and 6 of them lost their lives. And according to sources, according to the Uganda's People Defense Forces, 1 soldier of the Uganda's People Defense Forces also lost his life after this engagement with the South Sudanese People Defense Forces at their border at Kajukeji County. Now, both of these authorities have their own versions of how all this started so that there can be an exchange of fire at the borders between the UPDF and the South Sudanese Defense Forces. It is important to note that this is not the first time that there has been a conflict specifically at Kajukeji between the UPDF and the South Sudanese Defense Forces. But those previous incursions or conflicts have never been as deadly as what happened just a day ago between the UPDF and the South Sudanese Defense Forces. There have been issues with grazing, there have been issues with the border, that there are no demarcations where both countries start or end. There have been issues with patrol where the Uganda's Defense Forces has gone into South Sudan and South Sudanese Defense Forces have gone deeply into Uganda, and there have been conflict. But as I said, the previous conflicts have never been as deadly as what has happened just a few hours ago. And the Uganda's army spokesperson Felix Kulayije has said that the South Sudanese soldiers had crossed into Uganda's West Nile region and refused to leave, prompting the exchange of fire. And he's the one who confirmed that 1 Ugandan soldier lost his life because of the exchange. That is the Ugandan story. They are saying that the South Sudanese Defense Forces are the ones who were aggressive, and they went into Uganda, and upon the Uganda's Defense Forces telling them to leave and go to their side of their border, they refused to leave, and that is why the Uganda's Defense Forces engaged the South Sudanese Defense Forces. Now, according to South Sudan, according to the authorities in South Sudan, they say that Ugandan soldiers launched a surprise attack with tanks and artillery, leading to the loss of lives of 6 of their troops. That is the account as has been given by the South Sudanese authority over what happened. They say that they did not receive any communication from the Uganda's People Defense Forces or anything. They were not warned, but the Uganda's People Defense Forces attacked them by surprise. That led to the loss of lives of 6 of their troops, and the loss of life, of course, of 1 Uganda People Defense Forces troops because of that exchange. Now, the civilians received the high toll of what happened in that particular border, because as reports are saying right now, thousands of civilians have already left their homes because of the upscale of violence in that region, as well as the Uganda's People Defense Forces. According to civilians, the Uganda's People Defense Forces has now upped their deployment in that region. The border is now physically militarized by the Uganda's People Defense Forces, as tanks and more troops have now moved in that area, increasing the tensions of another violence that can take place in that particular locality. And further, according to a local chief in South Sudan, in that particular locality where this violence took place, Chief Tumio said that the Uganda's forces opened fire indiscriminately, forcing civilians to flee. Therefore, the South Sudanese People Defense Forces, as well as the South Sudanese Authority, the local authority in Kajukeji, are pointing their fingers at Uganda, saying that it is Uganda that aggressed the South Sudanese People Defense Forces and the authorities in place, and that led to the exchange of fire between the SSPDF and the UPDF. While on the Ugandan side, they are saying that they saw that the South Sudanese People Defense Forces and the authorities had come into the Ugandan side, and they told them that they should vacate that particular place, but the South Sudanese People Defense Forces did not budge, and that necessitated the Ugandan People Defense Forces, according to them, to start firing against the South Sudanese People Defense Forces, that led to casualties. And the South Sudanese People Defense Forces spokesperson, Major General Lul Ruai Koang, has said that both sides have agreed to an immediate ceasefire and will form a joint investigation committee to find out what exactly happened at the border and who started and what can be done right now to restore some semblance of peace at Kajukeji as well as the environs of that border, so that there can be a peaceful coexistence between communities. Well, I will continue to keep you informed of the latest of what will come out from Kajukeji as well as the relations between Uganda and South Sudan following that upscale of violence that right now has led to the loss of lives of 6 South Sudanese People Defense Forces and 1 Uganda's People Defense Forces troop. Keep it bona fide.